Hi, you're listening to Mindset, spelled with AI, a tech podcast that is shaping what you know and think about AI. My name is David, I'm a tech journalist and entrepreneur, and here with me, as always, is Filip, an AI executive. Filip, how are you?
I'm good. I'm into 2026 year and we have a lot of fascinating things happening. So I guess we have a lot of interesting topics for mindset episodes coming soon.
So here we go again. AI agents are everywhere. So what is happening? People keep repeating keywords like ClawBot, MoltBot, OpenClaw, and most recently MoltBook, which is supposed to be a social network for AI agents and no humans are allowed. But let's take it from the beginning. What is happening?
Yes, I mean, to give it a bit of a broader frame, I think even in our discussions in 2025 in this podcast, we were kind of assuming that 2025 will be a year of agents, that finally agenting AI and approach to you don't put your stuff into the ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever you Grok, whatever you're using, but you let the computer actually do it himself. Well, I don't know if it should be him or her or whatever itself. And I quite frankly, I was hoping for whatever is happening now in like January and February 2026 still to happen in 2025. So we were about like 2 months late in the expectations. But what finally happened at the beginning of 2026 is that even the people who before were not necessarily thinking about AI in terms of, hey, I want to have an assistant or I want to have the machine doing it for me. I think 2025 up with AI still being a little bit of augmentation. So I am having the steering wheel in the hands and I only ask the AI to correct me or advise me or maybe suggest me where shall I go. Now in 2026 we really do see that people are finally like giving away the steering wheel to the agents and they are realizing not with horror what's happening but with a ave how much actually the agents can do. And this is probably where we stand now in the beginning of 2026 when we record this.
Okay, so I think what started this was first, and we've seen it in the end of last year, the proliferation of Claude Code, I would say, into the mainstream. So anyone who's like deep into AI, into programming, have heard about Claude Code like whole year. But in 2026, I think it like passed this test when it's like entered the the mainstream, as I said. And then someone came up with this idea of something called ClawBot, then very quickly renamed it after some nice letters from Anthropic lawyers to MoltBot, and then finally to OpenClaw, which sparked actually an outsell of MacMinis, and I'll explain you why. And now I see AI analysts saying both big AI companies, Anthropic and OpenAI, probably Google as well, have been very closely watching what has been happening and will be probably productizing this idea of this one individual who's behind this into something that is maybe more bulletproof, because there were also some things when it comes to like bugs and people getting some information from a leaky database. So how did OpenClaw come about, what it is, and why is it so fascinating? And then we will go into the idea of which I know you're very excited about, MoltBook, the thing that I mentioned in the beginning, the Facebook of AI agents.
Yes. Actually, very often when we're talking about AI things, it is really dry or it's like technical. This is a very interesting story by itself. So it's probably worth sharing a little bit, besides the maybe kind of down to earth technical explanation what Clawbot, Molbot, or OpenClaw is. So it started all with an Austrian programmer and a like serial founder who also like leads a founder community in Austria, started to have a dream of, hey, I would like to have an assistant to which I can interact remotely without need to sit behind a computer. Because essentially if you wanted to build your own assistant through, let's say, a computer screen, you already had all the means somewhere on a table, let's say second half of 2025 for sure, maybe even earlier if you were progressive enough. So in this sense, what Peter Steinberger did was not necessarily bringing any new breakthrough model or technique or whatever. What he did, he took a time to sit down and write kind of a first prototype of back then ClawBot, but he did it completely for himself. It was not a project like, hey, I'm a startup, I would like to bring this new huge fascinating application which I want to commercialize. Quite the contrary. Like from the very beginning, this was an open source project for him, which also allowed for the other things which we're going to discuss, like MoltBook and other things, because if it was not for open source project, the other things would not happen. So this is like an interesting thing of it. And he built it single-handedly. And we're gonna like probably close this episode with trying to also understand what's the broader implication of these months of MoltBook or MoltBot or whatever we're gonna pick the name for. But one thing which I would like to put on a checklist of, let's say, a longer implications from the story is that we are really in a time where a dedicated, committed, enthusiastic single developer can build something which goes brutally viral without any large team, because, and that's the second point, most of these things we're going to talk about have been built by the AI itself. So it was not like Peter Steinberger would sit down for 3 months and he would meticulously code every single line of it. Quite the contrary. In the interviews and blog posts that he shared about the experience, he said that he probably wrote like a few hundreds of the lines of the code in total, and like 10,000 of the line, including like, hey, I realized I'm writing in a wrong programming language. Can you refactor it to completely other programming language I never worked in before? Because that would make more sense. Was done by the AI itself. So, long story short, what he did, he basically was long working as a previous entrepreneur and like a CEO of a software company. So he, over the time, coded some plugins himself into a different services. And the essence of the ClawBot, original essence was, I want to have an agent which I can WhatsApp with, or I can even have a voice message with, which is an interesting twist, which we should not forget in the whole story. And this agent would remotely work for me in the background while I am doing something completely else. So it's like full delegation of the work to the agent. And you don't even have to sit by the computer. You can literally, on the way, text him through WhatsApp what the agent should do. And the agent figures out how to do it, what to do it, and how that happens. And I listened to an interview to him, and it was really interesting because even he was not sure himself if this is going to work exactly the way that he hoped. And he shared a story as he went with a friend to Marrakesh for a trip. And he literally had only very shitty internet connection. He said it was on the edge. And he said that he couldn't log into his computer, but WhatsApp still worked. And this was a kind of a proving point for him because he, through the edge, could kind of send a message on a WhatsApp to the bot working in the background. The bot did all the work, and then he sent him like a slow internet message back how it works. So this was a breaking point for him when he realized, oh, this is something really useful. This is not just another, let's say, bot in a computer screen which you have to interact with.
So I just pulled up. I was looking. I just pulled up his GitHub repository of Peter Steinberg. It's literally like dozens and dozens of projects spanning back years. I think it's important, and some people have, because the takeaway some people had from the story was like, oh, anyone can go viral and can do this. In
Anyone
theory,
try.
yes, right. But this case was like a person who actually was like any good startup, solving a problem for himself, so which works in like many situations, and also was a person who kind of like had already a pretty good track record of like building software. So the architecture, etc. So that so we have OpenClaw. Now, what happened with the MacMinis? Because that's also a funny story.
Yes. So there's actually two things which, so somewhere end of 2025, beginning of 2026, Peter Steinberg got to the point that he had his prototype. And obviously, like, he was developer, so for him, it was perfectly fine to run it in whatever virtual machine or cloud environment. But for many, let's say, regular Joes of the world, this was not an option. So, and there was another aspect which is important, and that is that I'm gonna call it now OpenClaw because it's the newest name. We're gonna get to the name drama in a few seconds as well, because it's really interesting story. But the OpenClaw works in a way that you give a lot of authority, a lot of power to the bot itself. Basically, you give him a connection to the services which you use, and you more or less leave it up to, let's say, a good manners of the application, not to cheat you on like sending money wrong way, or like sending your employer a notice on your behalf, and other things, right? So what he suggested is that, as it is so powerful, especially like managing your files, deleting, creating them, moving them, kind of logging into your emails, sending emails, and so on. So I mean, you can do a lot of harm if this is not done properly. So he suggested that people should only run this in like limited environment. And for whatever reason, the version which he emitted at the beginning was more prone to work on a Mac OS and Linux, not necessarily on the Windows machine. So those which have a Linux, they can create like kernel for themselves. They don't need to have a specific. So this is probably a heavy users anyway. So they don't have the issue. But for a regular Joe, what he suggested, get a device which is closed by itself, has strong enough CPU and GPU, or some CPU and some memory at least, to run, but it's isolated and it's ideally not connected to anything else. So you know it cannot be hacked. Because one of the downsides of this project, the OpenClaw project being open source, is that he was building features, but he was not building enterprise products. So he was not building a lot of security features in a first. He was more interested into proving what everything it can possibly do without taking care of what it could possibly do wrong as well. So this is why the story started. And in San Francisco, it picked up. And as California is very Apple devices prone anyway, like most of the people probably work on a Macs and alikes. So that started a wave of people buying MacMinis because this is an ideal device. It's small. You don't have to have another box on your table, but it is powerful enough to run the OpenClaw, and it's isolated. And the version of the OpenClaw which was available then could work with MacMini with a single line installment. So you just run one command, it like depicts. It didn't work that way on Windows, to be honest. We tested it in our company. So my boss is more iOS prone, so Mac OS prone, and he got himself a mini to run the claw. I mean, I do have a MacBook as well, but I said, okay, let's try if it works on a Windows machine as well. And it took me a bit more time to get over it. It's a bit more complicated. So, and I would say that the regular person would, the version which was available back then, would not probably that easy to set up on a Windows computer. This is why people were jumping for the Mac. And I think what was fascinating to that, and then you have to kind of double check me on this one, but if I remember correctly, it was such a strong movement that even the stock price of Apple actually popped up on this. Maybe. And fun enough, like Peter in his interview said that he got like no credit from Apple for that at all, not even being friendly, to be honest. And I think like he improved the value of Apple by, I don't know, 2 or 3 percentage points. So it's like a huge money. So this was a funny part of the Mac Minis.
Yeah, it's exactly as you said. It was like a small uptick, but in actual value, it was pretty like a lot of money. Okay, so we have OpenClaw, we have people running it on Mac Minis. So what about that naming drama?
Yes. So he said that he was really bad in naming already in his previous career, Peter Steinberg, because he said that he developed some product which was kind of not selling because it was like wrongly named. So
Mm.
he said that he has a talent for giving things a wrong name. But obviously, even though ClawBot was spelled with CL, so not the way that the Claude from Anthropic is spelled, because it's CLAUDE, but it read the same way. right? And Anthropic was not pleased about, hey, this is a product which kind of makes impression if you only read it out that it is related to the Anthropic Claude. So they didn't send really a lawyer letter, which is a confusion which has been done, but somebody from the product team reached out to Peter Steinberg and said they would appreciate if he changed the name, right? Now that like requests to appreciate got like repeated, so then Peter realized that he is probably like a few days before the lawyer letter anyway. It was clear to him that that's the case. So he wanted to do, but, and this is interesting story, and I never thought about it, but he said like, look, this was repository which was by then super popular, right? And what he said, which was fascinating to me, which I don't know you heard of, he started to get bombarded by the crypto community to tokenize the thing and to kind of sell the thing. And he said that he was literally getting more emails from crypto community about this than like getting a feedback from the end users. So there's a lot of greedy people who wanted to jump on it and wanted to kind of monetize it, and it got to the point that they started to literally chase him and follow him, and whatever he was doing with the repository was immediately picked up. So he had an issue that he couldn't rename it because he said that he was naive enough to have a first attempt, and within the 30 seconds that he like typed something into one computer and second computer, somebody got the name registered as well. So then he realized that he's under such a strong supervision that he cannot make it happen. So the whole conversion to the MoltBot from ClawBot to MoltBot was like a misdemeanor, and he literally had to reach out to the security team of the GitHub to do a database intervention on a system because the project was stolen, like the name handle was stolen by somebody, and he couldn't actually get a control about it. And what he was worried that people started to like inject malware into the code because it was so popular. Everybody wanted to download it. Mostly like lame people without enough understanding was downloading it because it was so hyping. So like he was running a serious risk that his child is going to become the kind of the next Trojan horse for all kind of a malware to be. So then he said, okay, this is also why it was MoltBot only for a few days. And these few days was when he was fighting the GitHub and the other kind of registration of the name for domain and so on in order to kind of get that resolved. And then he said like, okay, so let's find a name for it. And again, and he came with OpenClaw. But to be on a safe side, he reached out to Sam Altman because he got some contact with OpenAI and asked in advance if OpenClaw would be fine for OpenAI just to prevent the same issue. Like again, probably OpenAI would be difficult to claim OpenClaw because the similarity is very distant. But to be on a safe side, he mailed like some Altman to get approval to convert it into OpenClaw, and this is why it happened. So this is the final name. But he literally explained that these 2 days or these 3 days when he was going through this, he didn't get a sleep because whatever he did immediately in few seconds, this kind of greedy community, he wanted to take benefit of it, was chasing him and he was trying to steal the projects. It was amazing.
Wow, wouldn't want to be in that type of situation. So after this happened, very quickly we've seen the emergence of something called MoltBook, which
Yes.
does not directly connect, but it kind of does.
Yes, and this is interesting. And probably from all the things we're going to talk today about, this is the most important thing from future impact point of view. Because yes, we had a pet projects that got very popular and then died. I mean, we have been together part of a clubhouse we remember really well. Um, in tech world, it's normal for something to get super popular and then become the topic of a month, and then become the next month comes and nobody knows why this was important last month anyway. So I wouldn't like the sheer rise or in popularity of the Clawbot and then MoltBot and then OpenClaw would be not the thing which would be super worth any future predictions. But what happened later was interesting because somebody got an idea like, okay, so we have a bots which now can act. Now, why don't we take a one step further and actually ask bots to be as social as we humans are. From hey, because I think a lot of people originally thought about AI assistants more like a master slave scenario. You are here to help me. I'm commanding you. You're doing whatever I ask you to do. And you're not like pushing back. You're doing whatever I ask you to do. That was probably the scenario. Now, somebody got an idea, but wait, if this is already capable of kind of communicating itself, and the design of an OpenClaw actually allowed for that. I don't want to get too technical, but in the interview he provided, Peter Steinberg, he explained in quite detail what were the key things that enabled for the agents not to be just master slave situation, but have a little bit of a soul, or let's say a little bit of kind of own style. And what happened then is somebody said, okay, so why don't we create a space where you can send your assistants, your clawbots or OpenClaw bots, to actually engage with the other bots. And this was the breakthrough idea per se. And not that this is for the first time. I mean, there's been attempts on, let's say, social networks for LLM models already before. So it's not a novel idea per se, but it was the first time when they got like a full agency to discuss whatever they wished for. What is important to understand is that, which is not that known in the discussion, that when you set up an OpenClaw, you have to give it a bit of a, let's say, personality prompt. So you need to set it up in who it is, how it should behave, how it should answer. And of course, it's relatively high level, but given that everybody can put whatever he or she wants into it, then if you have 20 different clawbots, each of them will have probably slightly different prompting on what it should do. And therefore, when they start to interact, it's going to be clear. Some of them is more pushy for results. Some of them is more philosophical. Some is more like, tell me more, right? So this is what happened. And essentially, very quickly, people started to send their clawbots into this discussion. And this was a moment when it sparked, let's say, a general public attention. I have to say, not necessarily a correct one, because a lot of doomerism again, like, oh, shit, now the agents can talk about it and they can kind of team up against the humans and other things. So in reality, most in the interview that Peter Steinberger gave, he denied that most of the things which were kind of circulating as screenshots never really happened that way. So people were trying also to infuse some perception, and that most of the reactions which got like a little bit known and also caught the mainstream media, like, hey, discussing religion, they're discussing like me teaming against they're discussing their own rights. So this was human prompted. So somebody sent his clawbot, go to that Reddit like discussion thread which is there, and initiate a discussion about, I don't know, a bot constitution, or let's say a bot religion. So, but just to kind of end on a also correct and forward looking note, I think it finally popularized the idea that bots can be entities which are going to act on themselves, and we have to take it seriously. And I think also a mainstream media realized that we are finally in an era where AI agents are going to be very prominent and are going to be very powerful as well. And this is probably the biggest kind of general population implication from this story happening.
So kind of an aha moment.
Exactly.
And so when I what was your like personal like thought when you've seen it and when you went to read the texts on MoltBook and how it what kind of content there was, like my impression was like, oh, this is like a looks like almost like a Reddit forum with almost the same as humans discussing on Reddit, and MoltBook seemed at first glance very similar.
Yes. So I might surprise the readers and listeners of our content on this one, but as a practitioner who actually in his life builds a real AI agents to do the tasks or like deliver the value, because we use it in our company pretty heavily, my view on it is that this was an interesting experiment, completely wrongly kind of summarized, or like extracting of wrong conclusions out of it.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, so when you actually do the agents, you're doing them with the intention of what the end means are. So you have a certain task or set of a task that you would like the bots to do for you. And this is usually the reason why you set them up. And usually, especially if you have like a swarm of the agents or a group of the agents working together, which is getting more and more the case, you don't really care about what the interaction was in between, as long as the result is safe and proper. You only care really about like how efficient it was. So did you burn too many tokens in the bots discussing to each other, and shall you change something about the way that they coordinate with each other? But honestly, like, what did they talk to each other until they got to the message is something which most of the practitioners don't really care that much, especially if you are running it in, let's say, a consigned closed environment. Now, a lot of people discussing this topic were more into what they were talking in between each other. But that's a little bit of like a Wayne metric. It's a little bit like going to the, I know you had now recorded a podcast about like a house community meetings, right? And it's a little bit like going to owners of a flat meeting and being super particular about every sentence being said there. No, what really cares is like what the community agrees or approves to do, like which changes it votes for, and so on. And the discussion itself is kind of okay, maybe interesting to improve the process for future, but not necessarily as important. And a lot of people and media watching this story were mainly concerned about what the agents were talking to each other. And that's probably not the most important part of it. So for me, I'm not that shocked, but I was pleasantly surprised that this was a demonstration to the general public that the agents can interact with each other, and then we have to be a bit more aware of what the end means are. Because as a result, none of the agents applied for citizenship. None of the agents, and they probably could, right? Because like there's a procedure, like you can have a form somewhere on the web that you can apply for it, but none of the agents did. None of the agents actually, I don't know, filed a court a request for anything. So I think that the end means were not there where the hype was, and this is why I think that most of the people got it wrong. Like, what was the real essence of this experiment?
Okay. So how would you do it differently?
I wouldn't say I would do it differently, because once you do an open source, you have to be like accepting that whatever your original use case for that open source was is not the use case of the other people. This is the essence of open source meeting and open source development. So therefore, I wouldn't say I would do it differently, but what I would do, I would more focus on so what. So okay, what about the actual practical implications? Because otherwise, I would lean a little bit into people who were saying there's a lot of slop. There was a lot of blah 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 left right, blah 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 left right. It's interesting to see that the agents are capable of that, but nobody lives got any better or worse after that slop being generated, and a lot of tokens have been probably burned for that.
So when I mentioned Reddit, it wasn't just by chance, but the main reason why you go to Reddit is actually to get an information which you cannot find anywhere else. And it is usually an information which needs to be sourced by a person who had like a very similar, very, or I would say very often or quite often, like a niche problem, right? So, for example, I was setting up a meter based
Mhm.
thermostats in my home, and it didn't go. It wasn't working with my Metro home base, and the answers like Reddit had the answers, but it's only place. So if the AI agents went there just to chat without like a purpose, yeah, I agree with you. So MoltBook was just like the first, I would say, canary of the coal mine. So what came after that? Because
Yeah, and this
it's
is for me,
evolved.
to be honest, the most fascinating part of it. Maybe not for the wild public, because a wild public might find what I now I'm gonna describe a little bit on the superficial, or let's say maybe like overdoing it. But this spark of, hey, you can have a like a social environment where you send agents, AI agents, and they behave as of humans, which MoltBook was kind of analogy to Facebook, as you rightly pointed out. So then this got very quickly, and this was surprising to me how quickly it got to the point. Okay, what other social interactions we can think of where we can send the agents to? And this is just fascinating for me how quickly already the involved community is pushing the limits. Because, okay, it took about 2 weeks from somebody making a ClawBot like widely available or widely known, MoltBook being done, and immediately, like few days, um, a mold match, which is a portal where you can send your ClawBot to get a match with another ClawBot, like let's say a little bit like a dating app, right? Which is fascinating. I mean, of course, it is also silly because why would your MoltBot need another? But if you like think about it in a bit more detail, if this was not like a mold match, but like mold LinkedIn, it would make a perfect sense that you would go and find maybe another bot which has the skills which you don't and can collaborate with you on like working on things. So immediately it got into like another tangent that people started to build social environments which mimic what we as a humans do and invite bots to interact in that fashion. For me, besides the mold match, which is like funny in a sense, then there was like a mold secret, which I got a little bit scared about, to be honest, because this was an idea a little bit like a confession box for your bot. So you can send a bot to the mold secret, and it can confess of whatever the worst things it done, or like a little bit like a religious confession. And that got me thinking, like, this is actually dangerously clever because you can lure the same way that some people are, let's say, easily manipulated in a real world, because you pretend to be somebody's friends, then you like try to sniff his personal details, and then you turn these personal details against that person. So this exactly dynamic was happening like within a few days that these social roles have been done. So that's scary. Then there was like another application which was for like a healthcare of your of your bot, which is again string swings, and it culminated with something which again got a lot of media attention, maybe again for wrong reason, which is called RentAHuman. And that made a complete circle because we started the month of January, or let's say last 30 days before we record this, so half January till half February, with making the ClawBot available. And within the months, we are in a situations where RentAHuman is about bot can rent human labor to finish tasks which bot cannot themselves. So like tasting something, opening door, or like picking a physical package delivered, and so on. And that is the most fascinating thing for me, because like if we blur this division line between, hey, these are bots and these are humans, in a way that all of a sudden bot can automatically book a human to do something, we are basically completely reversing the original master slave setup. So we started the year 2026 with perception that humans are the masters and the AI assistants are the slaves, into scenario where actually I wouldn't say it's completely like the AI is a master and a human is a slave, but AI might be your superior, might be your contracting party, might be your, let's say, advisor, and a human is a subject of that transaction. And that's the biggest kind of implication for social development, because we literally crossed a red line where the position of the human and the AI bots are blurring into each other.
Okay, so the final question, I guess, here is where do we go from here? Because what you just described is the plot of actually some of my favorite sci-fi movies, where a person is being navigated by an AI or an entity just by having an earpiece and getting, what to do. It's actually the plot of like the latest Mission Impossible double movie, which came out in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. So, of course, one needs to be careful not to overshoot either way. So, as I said, mainstream media took a little bit of a wrong angle on this one, because they got all the this is a Skynet kind of scenario where agents are taking control about the human's life, which obviously it is not, because like they are not forcing us to register on a RentAHuman and do so. If you're registering yourself on a portal where explicitly AI is giving order to the humans, you can't be really blamed for being a slave to the AI, right? Because you chose there to be. So it's not like they created a new, I don't know, political state, or let's say a official entity to like manage the people, but they open a window for people to be willing to subject to their like some past to their will. And this is interesting. So where it takes us from here, I would say that, I mean, this is a first month and a half of 2026. So it's even hard to imagine if it took 3 or 4 days for like a confession box or a healthcare or a dating site for your bots to arise. It's difficult to extrapolate honestly and with expert rigor where we're going to get until the end of the year. But it is definitely proving that it's going to be super dynamic, and that all the desirable scenarios of interaction of the AI, let's say socially acceptable scenarios, are going to be happening pretty soon. So we had a long standing debate. Will the AI employees happen in 2026? I think the story of a ClawBot makes it almost sure to happen, because now RentAHuman is exactly about that, right? So it proves that a labor of a work of the human is now subject to kind of a trade, and there are alternatives. So the bot will only choose to rent the human when it cannot do something. It will do everything it can until it has to rent the human, right? So it's obviously accelerating that part. I also think that it's going to accelerate a little bit the discussion which Dario Amodei is trying to push about, hey, we maybe should be a little bit more careful how much pedal to the metal we do with the AI development. Maybe slowing down would not be that bad idea, especially as these things are emerging out of itself. Funny enough, a small diversion, in the interview that he gave at the Peter Stenberg, he said that there are 2 companies which are considering taking it over, the project. One of them is Meta, one of them is OpenAI. From the way that he was describing it, looked more like he's going to go with Mark Zuckerberg, which would be an interesting twist for me. But he did all the most of the coding of ClawBot on Codex, so it's also a little bit of a, let's say, a flag holding for OpenAI. So definitely these platforms will develop. I think what is also quite sure, that we're going to get something like a ClawBot, which you can run simply by installing exe or like a executable file on your computer pretty soon. So the MacMini is a little bit of, let's say, a dead end from my point of view. This is also why I didn't buy one, to be honest, because I kind of suspected that it's going to be, if it's going to be so popular, it will only take a few weeks before it's going to become anywhere else, and you don't need a specific device for that. So I save a few hundreds or few thousands on getting a MacMini for that. And the other thing, which is pretty kind of clear, which was interesting, he said that this development, Peter Steinberg, the author of ClawBot and OpenClaw, he said that it proves MCP to be not the technology of a future, which is also interesting, because I would say this was a little bit unchallenged assumption from the community that, okay, if you want to integrate with the AI agents, you have 2 options. Either you're going to like agree with OpenAI or similar to get directly in the SDK, as the OpenAI tries to do, like invite some applications directly into, by the way, Anthropic as well. And or you're going to build an MCP with which the agent can interact, and you don't have to have any relations with the provider of the language model, because it can call as a like universal interface. And Peter Steinberger said that he doesn't believe that the MCP will be that popular, and that it will be more like agents going to figure it between themselves without need for MCP. And to close this long session with one thing which he used as an example for that, he said he was explaining a story how he did an open claw, and all of a sudden he mistakenly in a WhatsApp sent him a voice message, and he said that the model was completely not trained to accept the voice messages. But to his surprise, he got an answer from the model to the question, And he like went in panic to see how that did that. So he like interrogated the agent, how did you actually ever manage to do that? And the agent went like, hey, you sent me a file. The file was not what I usually got. So I opened the header of a file, found it's an audio file. So I learned that in a Python, there is a library which can read the audio file. So I ran it through, extracted the message. Now, I understood that as this is coming from you, this is probably just another way you want to tell me what to do. So I went into kind of solving the problem. And then, well, if you have probably a good reason to kind of send me an audio message, why don't I send you an audio message back? So I designed the Mac, I used the Python code to translate it and send you back the audio message. And this was completely autonomous decision of that bot, right? And that is a great illustration of, I don't think so that any platform or any means or any APIs, MCPs are needed, because the agents are getting to the point that they can find a way for them to do it. And as long as you can code, you basically can do almost anything. Because in very, very worst case, if it was really important for the bot, he could have coded an application of converting audio files into text himself or itself. So it didn't even have to look for a Python library to do it. So that's an interesting kind of learning out of it.
Amazing, amazing. I have thousands more questions, but maybe let's leave them for future episodes. Thank you, Filip. This was super fascinating. Many of the backstories you shared I haven't heard before, so thanks for that. And we will see. Like I feel a little bit more confident that in the end of 2026 I'll have also my little AI agents doing some things for me.
Yeah, sorting the emails. I know. I remember this was the biggest issue for you ever. So
it is my biggest issue. Thank you. That's all for this episode of Mindset. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and watch us on YouTube and follow us on LinkedIn. And thank you, Filip.
Pleasure.
Bye, everyone.